The wedding venue looked like something out of a dream. Tall glass doors stood open, letting warm afternoon light spill into the marble-floored hall. White flowers lined the entrance, their soft fragrance mixing with the faint scent of incense drifting from the ceremonial stage. Somewhere in the background, gentle instrumental music played, slow, careful notes that seemed to whisper promises of forever. Guests arrived in clusters, their voices low and cheerful, silk and embroidered fabrics brushing past one another as they took their seats. If you love emotional real-life wedding stories, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because this story takes a turn no one saw coming. From the bridal room, I watched it all through a half-drawn curtain. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I adjusted the edge of my dupatta with slightly trembling fingers, taking a slow breath as I tried to calm my racing heart. Every bride feels nervous, I told myself. This is normal. This is joy. This is the beginning of something beautiful. Outside, my husband stood near the stage, surrounded by relatives. He looked handsome in his tailored sherwani, smiling politely as guests congratulated him. When his eyes briefly met mine across the room, he gave a small nod, a quiet reassurance. I smiled back, though something in my chest felt strangely tight. Today was meant to unite two families. That thought echoed in my mind as I scanned the hall. My relatives sat together on one side, modest but proud, their faces glowing with quiet happiness. And then there was his family, elegant, confident, commanding attention without trying. They moved through the space as if they owned it, discussing the decor, the arrangements, the service, occasionally glancing around with critical eyes. Share this story with someone who believes weddings are only about love, because sometimes they reveal much more. Still, everything looked perfect. The venue shimmered under crystal chandeliers. The stage was flawless. The guests were impressed. From the outside, it was the kind of wedding people would talk about for years, the kind mothers pointed to and said, "This is how it should be." Yet beneath the beauty, I felt a subtle unease, like the air just before a storm. I thought of my mother. She had been unusually quiet all morning, smiling softly, saying little as she helped wherever she was needed. She hadn't fussed over her clothes or jewelry. She never did. For her, being present was enough. I had assumed the calm in her eyes was peace. Now, watching the hall fill with people, I wondered if it was something else, patience, perhaps. Or restraint. As the music swelled slightly and the last guests settled into their seats, I whispered to myself, "This is it. This is our beginning." Stay with me till the end, and make sure you're subscribed, because what happened next turned this dream wedding into a lesson no one will forget. I didn't know then that this perfect scene, this flawless, glittering moment, was standing on the edge of something that would change everything. And the storm was already inside the room. As I stood there, listening to the soft murmur of guests and the distant clinking of glasses, my thoughts drifted backward, to where I came from, and to the woman who brought me here. My mother sat quietly in the second row, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a simple, light-colored sari, the kind she always chose, clean, graceful, never loud. There was no heavy jewelry, no dramatic makeup. Just a small smile and eyes that carried years of stories. She didn't look around to see who was watching her. She never did. She had spent her entire life learning how to be invisible so her child could be seen. I was raised by her alone. After my father passed away, there was no safety net, no family fortune, no one to lean on. Just my mother and me in a small house on the edge of the city, where the sounds of traffic mixed with evening prayers and stray dogs barking in the distance. She worked 2 jobs, one by day, another by night, returning home with tired feet and the same gentle smile. I don't remember her ever complaining. I remember her saying, "As long as you study, I'm rich." Across the hall sat my husband's parents. They were surrounded by relatives, laughter ringing loudly around them. His mother wore heavy gold jewelry that caught the light with every movement, her sharp eyes scanning the room like an inspector. His father sat back confidently, speaking in a tone that expected agreement, not discussion. Their world was different, large homes, powerful connections, Dinners where people talked about money and influence as if they were birthrights. They believed status was everything. I noticed how his mother's gaze lingered briefly on my own mother, just long enough to judge, to measure, and to dismiss. She leaned toward a relative and whispered something, lips tightening slightly. I couldn't hear the words, but I felt them. My husband stood between these two worlds. When his mother gestured for him, he went willingly, nodding as she spoke. Then he glanced back at me, uncertainty flickering across his face before he quickly looked away. I told myself he was just nervous. Everyone was nervous today. Still, a quiet tension settled into my chest. Two families had gathered under one roof, smiling for the cameras, pretending harmony came easily. But beneath the silken smiles, I could feel the divide, deep, silent, and waiting. This wedding wasn't just a celebration. It was a collision. And I was standing right in the middle, unaware of how quickly that difference in worlds would turn into something far more painful. I noticed it first in the smallest ways. A pause that lasted a second too long. A glance exchanged between my husband's relatives. The kind of looks people think no one sees, but I did. From the stage, I watched as my mother shifted slightly in her seat, smoothing the edge of her sari over her knees, unaware that she had become the center of quiet judgment. My mother-in-law leaned toward one of her sisters, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through the hum of the hall. Is she really going to sit there? She whispered, her eyes flicking toward my mother. So close to the stage? Her sister followed her gaze and gave a thin smile. I was wondering the same. Usually, that area is for immediate family. Immediate family. The words landed like stones. My mother heard it too. I saw it in the way her shoulders stiffened, just slightly. She didn't look up. She didn't respond. She simply lowered her eyes, as if shrinking would make her disappear. That was something I had seen many times before, in markets, offices, places where people spoke down to her because they thought she had no power. Another relative chimed in, not bothering to lower her voice. Did she not have something more, suitable to wear? Her eyes scanned my mother's simple sari, the plain sandals beneath it. This is a high-profile wedding. My throat tightened. The music continued to play softly, and guests laughed nearby, unaware that a quiet cruelty was unfolding just a few steps away. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to say something. But my feet felt rooted to the floor, my smile frozen for the cameras. My mother-in-law stood up suddenly, adjusting her dupatta with authority. She walked over to my mother and smiled, a smile that never reached her eyes. You must be uncomfortable here, she said sweetly. Why don't you move to the side? There are better seats, in the back. The word back was heavy with meaning. My mother looked up then, confusion flickering across her face. Oh. I'm fine here. She replied softly. My daughter. Before she could finish, my mother-in-law cut her off with a light laugh. Yes, of course. But tradition matters, you know. I watched my mother nod slowly, rising from her seat without argument. She gathered her purse, her movements calm, dignified. But her hands were shaking. I could see that from where I stood. Shame burned through me. This was my wedding. And yet, I felt powerless as my mother was quietly pushed aside, judged for her simplicity, her silence, her humility. As she moved toward the edge of the hall, avoiding everyone's eyes, a terrible thought crept into my mind. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. What happened next unfolded so quickly, it felt unreal, like watching something shatter in slow motion while being unable to stop it. My mother had barely reached the side of the hall when my mother-in-law's voice rose, sharp and clear, cutting through the music. This is exactly the problem, she said loudly, turning to the guests around her. No understanding of standards. Conversations around the hall faltered. Heads turned. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I felt my heart slam against my ribs. My mother stopped walking. My mother-in-law stepped forward, no longer pretending politeness. You don't see women like this at weddings like ours, she continued, her gaze sweeping over my mother's simple clothes. People are already talking. It reflects badly on us. Badly on us. A relative nodded in agreement. Honestly, she added, loud enough for others to hear, this is a very high-class event. There's a certain image to maintain. My mother turned slowly to face them. Her face was calm, but her eyes, those eyes that had always been steady, now held a flicker of hurt she couldn't hide. I didn't mean to cause any trouble, she said quietly. I'm only here for my daughter. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. Some guests looked away, embarrassed. Others watched openly, curiosity replacing celebration. My mother-in-law scoffed. That's exactly it, she snapped. This isn't a place for emotional displays. This wedding is about status, about reputation. You should understand that. I felt the room closing in on me. From the stage, I took a half step forward, my mouth opening, but no sound came out. My legs felt weak. My hands clenched into fists beneath layers of fabric. I searched for my husband, but he stood frozen near his parents, eyes lowered, saying nothing. Silence, his silence, hurt almost as much as their words. Someone whispered, "This is so awkward," and another replied, "Why would they let her sit there in the first place?" Each word felt like a slap. My mother's chin trembled for just a second before she straightened her back. She nodded once, slowly, as if accepting a truth she already knew. "I'll go," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. That was when the shame truly hit me, not because of what they were saying, but because they were saying it openly, confidently, certain they had the right. The wedding hall that had sparkled moments ago now felt cold and exposed. The music had stopped. I was watching as my mother stood alone in the center of the room, stripped of dignity by people who had never known her sacrifices. And deep down, I realized something terrifying. They weren't finished. They were about to go even further. The word security changed everything. My mother-in-law didn't shout it. She didn't need to. She simply lifted her hand, her bangles clinking softly, and spoke with cold certainty. "Please remove her. We don't want any more disruption." For a moment, no one moved. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Then two men in dark uniforms stepped forward from near the entrance, their expressions stiff and professional. The sight of them, standing where guests should have been, felt wrong, deeply wrong. My heart began to race. "There's no need for this," my mother said quietly, raising her hand slightly, not in defense, but in surrender. "I'm already leaving." One of the guards hesitated, glancing toward my mother-in-law for confirmation. She nodded once, sharply. "Escort her out," she said. "Now." I felt the ground shift beneath me. "Ma," the word slipped out of my mouth before I could stop it, breaking through the heavy silence. My voice sounded small, almost lost in the vastness of the hall. My mother turned toward me. Our eyes met. In that single look, I saw everything she didn't say. "It's okay. Don't make this harder. Don't ruin your day for me." Her lips curved into a faint smile, the same one she had worn after long days of exhaustion, the same one she used whenever she wanted to protect me from pain. One of the guards gently touched her elbow. It wasn't rough, but it didn't need to be. The message was clear. She began to walk, the sound of her sandals against the polished floor echoed loudly, each step heavier than the last. Conversation stopped completely now. Even the air felt thick, suffocating. I could hear the hum of the chandeliers, the distant traffic outside, the pounding of my own heart. As she passed by rows of guests, I noticed the expressions, some shocked, some uncomfortable, some indifferent. A few women looked away, adjusting their dupattas, pretending not to see. No one spoke. I wanted to run after her. My body screamed at me to move, to stand beside her, to say something, anything. But I stayed frozen, trapped by fear, by expectation, by the weight of 1,000 watching eyes. At the doors, my mother paused. She pressed her lips together, blinking slowly, fighting back tears she refused to let fall in public. Then she straightened her shoulders and walked out, disappearing into the bright afternoon light. The doors closed behind her with a soft, final sound. That was my breaking point. The wedding hall no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a courtroom where judgment had already been passed. And as I stood there, shaking, one thought cut through the pain with terrifying clarity. If they could do this to my mother, what would they do next? I stayed where I was long after my mother disappeared through those doors. The music started again, soft at first, uncertain, like it didn't know whether it was welcome. Someone cleared their throat. Chairs shifted. Life, somehow, attempted to move on. But inside me, everything had stopped. My chest felt tight, as if the air itself had grown heavier. I could still see her back as she walked away, still feel the weight of her silence pressing down on me. She hadn't argued. She hadn't cried. She hadn't even looked angry. And that hurt more than anything else. Why didn't you say something? A voice screamed inside my head. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking beneath the embroidered fabric of my dress. These were the same hands my mother had held when I was a child, crossing busy streets in our neighborhood, whispering, "Stay close." Now, when she needed me most, I had let go. My husband stood a few steps away, staring at the floor. His jaw was clenched, his shoulders tense. For a moment, I thought he might speak. That he might turn to his parents and say, "Enough." Instead, he said nothing. I took a small step toward him. "Did you see what they just did?" I whispered, my voice barely steady. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his forehead. "This isn't the time," he murmured. "Please, not right now. Not the time." The words felt like a slap. I wanted to scream that there would never be a right time for injustice. That my mother hadn't chosen this moment either. But the hall was full of eyes, of expectations, of traditions that demanded obedience and silence from a bride. So I swallowed my words. I told myself I would speak later. After the ceremony. After the guests left. After things calmed down. I told myself staying quiet was the mature thing to do. The practical thing. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was afraid. Afraid of causing a scene. Afraid of breaking the illusion of the perfect wedding. Afraid of what standing up might cost me. And that fear wrapped itself around my guilt, tightening with every second that passed. Somewhere outside, a car horn blared. The city moved on, unaware that a mother had been humiliated, that a daughter had stayed silent. I closed my eyes briefly, feeling tears sting behind them. A terrible realization settled in my chest: silence wasn't neutral. It was a choice. And I had just made it. As I opened my eyes again, a strange tension filled the room, as if something unseen was shifting, preparing to surface. I didn't know it yet, but the silence I had chosen was about to be shattered, by a truth no one in that hall was ready for. The hall had not yet recovered from what had just happened. People sat stiffly in their seats, unsure whether to resume smiling or pretend nothing had gone wrong. The music played again, but this time it felt hollow, like a performance no one believed in anymore. I stood near the stage, my heart still pounding, my thoughts tangled in guilt and shame. Then I noticed a man walking quickly down the center aisle. He was dressed differently from the guests: dark suit, neat tie, a badge clipped to his jacket. His steps were purposeful, his expression serious. Whispers followed him as he moved closer to the stage. "That's the venue manager," someone murmured behind me. He climbed the steps and leaned toward the microphone, tapping it once. The soft thud echoed through the hall, silencing the scattered conversations. Even the music faded away. "Excuse me," he said clearly. "May I have everyone's attention, please?" Every head turned. "I need to speak with the owner of the venue regarding an urgent matter." A ripple of confusion passed through the crowd. My mother-in-law frowned, straightening in her seat. She glanced around confidently, as if expecting someone else to stand. The manager adjusted his glasses, scanning the hall. "Mrs. Aisha Khan," he called out. The name seemed to hang in the air. No one answered. A low murmur began, people turning to one another, brows furrowed. My mother-in-law's smile tightened. "There must be some mistake," she said sharply, rising from her seat. "The owner is not present. This wedding was booked months ago." The manager hesitated, checking his tablet. "I was informed the owner was attending today," he replied politely. "She stepped out just moments ago." The words sent a chill through me. Stepped out. The manager looked toward the doors, then back at the crowd. "Could someone please inform Mrs. Aisha Khan that she's needed immediately?" Silence fell like a heavy curtain. I felt my breath catch. Slowly, realization began to spread across the room, first as confusion, then as disbelief. Guests whispered more urgently now. Heads turned toward the exit. Toward the doors my mother had just walked through. My mother-in-law's face drained of color. "That's not possible," she said, her voice suddenly unsteady. She's just what?" A guest near the front leaned toward another. "Isn't that the bride's mother's name?" she whispered. The manager nodded, overhearing. "Yes," he said simply. "That's correct." The impact was immediate. Gasps rippled through the hall. The confident posture my in-laws had worn all day cracked in an instant. My mother-in-law gripped the back of her chair as if the ground beneath her had shifted. The truth had surfaced, quietly, calmly, and with devastating force. And as the doors at the back of the hall opened once more, I understood that the power in this room had just changed hands. Nothing would be the same again. The doors at the back of the hall opened again, and this time, my mother walked in with steady steps. The room fell completely silent. She looked the same as she had moments earlier, the same simple sorry, the same calm expression, but something about her presence had changed. She wasn't walking away now. She was walking forward. Behind her, the venue manager followed respectfully, holding a folder close to his chest. My mother-in-law stood frozen, her mouth slightly open. "What is this?" she demanded, trying to regain control. "Why is she back here?" The manager stepped ahead before my mother could speak. "Madam," he said politely but firmly, "there seems to have been a misunderstanding." He turned toward the guests, his voice carrying across the hall. "Mrs. Aisha Khan is the owner of this venue." A collective gasp swept through the room. My knees nearly gave way. The manager continued, "She has also personally covered the majority of the wedding expenses, choosing to remain anonymous at her daughter's request." Every whisper, every judgment, every insult replayed itself in my mind. My mother-in-law's face went pale. "That's impossible," she stammered. "We paid." "You paid a portion," the manager corrected calmly. "The rest was handled privately." My mother finally spoke. Her voice was soft, but it carried authority. "I never wanted recognition," she said. "This day was for my daughter. I only wanted her to be happy." She looked at me then, her eyes warm, unwavering. Tears burned in my own eyes as the weight of her sacrifices crashed over me all at once. Around us, guests shifted uncomfortably. Some avoided eye contact. Others stared openly, or replacing earlier judgment. My mother-in-law tried to smile, her tone changing instantly. "Well, why didn't you say so?" she laughed nervously. "This is all just a misunderstanding." My mother didn't return the smile. "Respect should not depend on wealth," she replied calmly. "And dignity should not be questioned because someone chooses simplicity." The words struck harder than any shout. My husband stood speechless, his confident family suddenly shrinking beside him. The power they had wielded so easily moments ago had vanished, replaced by embarrassment and fear. For the first time that day, I felt something shift inside me too. Shame gave way to clarity. Silence gave way to strength. My mother had never been weak. She had simply never needed to prove her power, until now. As the hall buzzed with stunned whispers, I sensed what was coming next wouldn't be loud or dramatic. It would be decisive. And it would change everything. My mother stood at the center of the hall, calm as the stillness before rain. She took a slow breath, then turned to the venue manager. "Please stop the event," she said quietly. Effective immediately. For a heartbeat, no one reacted. The words felt too gentle to carry such weight. Then the manager nodded once, respectfully, and signaled to the staff. The music cut off. The lights softened. Servers froze mid-step. A ripple of disbelief spread through the guests. My mother-in-law rushed forward, panic cracking through her polished voice. "You can't do this," she protested. "This is our family's wedding. Think of the guests. Think of the embarrassment." My mother met her gaze, unflinching. "I did," she replied. "I thought of the embarrassment when you asked security to remove me." The hall went silent again. My husband stepped toward me, his face pale. "Please," he whispered, glancing around. "Let's talk about this privately." I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time that day. At the man who had watched silently as my mother was humiliated. The man who had asked for patience when injustice demanded action. I stepped past him and walked to my mother's side. The rustle of my dress echoed loudly in the quiet hall. I slipped my hand into hers, feeling the familiar warmth, the steady strength that had carried me my whole life. "I'm with her," I said, my voice clear despite the tremor in my chest. A murmur swept through the room. My mother's grip tightened slightly, and for the first time that day, her eyes shone with unshed tears, not of pain, but of relief. Guests began to rise from their seats, some whispering apologies as they passed, others avoiding eye contact altogether. A few offered sympathetic smiles. Others left quickly, eager to escape the discomfort. My in-laws stood frozen, their authority gone, their arrogance exposed. The confidence they had worn like armor lay shattered at their feet. Outside, evening light filtered through the glass doors, bathing the hall in a soft gold. The city's distant sounds drifted in, traffic, voices, life continuing. As the last guests filed out, the grand hall felt suddenly empty. Not just of people, but of illusion. My mother exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing for the first time all day. "This isn't how I imagined your wedding," she said softly. I shook my head, tears finally spilling. "You imagined it with dignity," I replied. "That's what matters." She smiled then, small, tired, but proud. And in that moment, surrounded by silence and truth, I understood something clearly. This wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of choosing who deserved to stand beside us, and who did not. The hall was quiet now, too quiet for a place that had promised celebration. Only a few petals remained scattered across the floor, crushed under hurried footsteps. The chandeliers still glowed softly, reflecting off empty chairs and abandoned decorations, as if the room itself was trying to understand what had just happened. Outside, dusk settled over the city, the sky painted in shades of orange and fading blue. My mother and I sat together on the steps near the entrance, side by side, just like we had countless times before, on the worn steps of our old house, watching evenings turn into night. Neither of us spoke at first. The cool air brushed against my face, carrying the distant sounds of traffic and evening prayers. I stared ahead, my wedding jewelry heavy around my neck, each piece now feeling like a reminder of something lost, and something gained. "I should have spoken sooner," I finally said, my voice breaking. "I let them treat you like you didn't matter." My mother reached for my hand, her touch gentle, familiar. "You were afraid," she said softly. "Fear makes good people quiet. That doesn't make them bad." Tears slipped down my cheeks. "But silence has a cost," I whispered. She nodded. "Yes. And today, you learned what that cost looks like." I thought of the man I had married, or thought I had. Of the family that valued appearances over people. Of how easily respect disappeared when they believed no one was watching. Love, I realized, could not survive in a place where dignity was negotiable. I turned to my mother. "I choose you," I said simply. She looked at me, surprised, then smiled through her tears. "You always have," she replied. We stood together and began to walk toward the car waiting at the gate. The road ahead stretched dark and uncertain, but for the first time that day, I felt steady. I wasn't walking into comfort or approval, I was walking into truth. Behind us, the grand venue stood silent, stripped of its glamour. Ahead of us, the city lights flickered on one by one, ordinary and honest. As the car pulled away, I rested my head against my mother's shoulder, just as I had when I was a child returning home late at night. Some lessons come wrapped in celebration. Others come dressed as heartbreak. But the most important ones teach you this. Never trade your voice for acceptance. Never trade dignity for comfort. And never abandon the person who stood by you when you had nothing. That day, I didn't lose a wedding. I found myself.